Picture this. You're standing in the middle of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, hearing the bustle of markets, feeling the weight of massive temples, and noticing the intricate hierarchy that governs every corner of the city. Now shift the scene. You're walking through the Forbidden City in Ming China, with officials carrying out policies and traders moving goods across vast networks. Then imagine Spain in the 16th century, navigating conquest, colonies, and the flow of gold and silver that reshaped the world economy. One thing becomes clear. These empires weren't static or simple. They were constantly changing and adapting to political pressures, religious demands, and social changes. Between the 13th and 16th centuries, the Ming, Spanish, Taino, Japanese, and Aztec empires each experienced major political, religious, economic, and social changes shaped by their environments that are similar and different from each other and still impact our modern world. And that's my argument in this exploration. The Ming, Spanish, Aztec, and other empires of the 13th through 16th centuries were not just powerful. They were dynamic, resilient, and deeply influential. Changes in their environments, exposure to disease, and the movement of people and ideas reshaped their societies in ways that still echo today. Most of all, they have lasting similarities and differences that are important to dig deep into. They have much relevance in today's world too. We can look at their similarities and differences from the characteristics of their social/political changes, religious and racial changes, and economic changes, also looking at their relevance. We see their relevance in comparisons first in politics and social organization, from the Ming bureaucratic system to Aztec imperial governance to Spanish colonial rule. These empires developed ways to maintain control, enforce laws, and manage diverse populations. Lessons that still impact modern leadership and administration. Second are environmental changes and disease, which dramatically altered these civilizations. Epidemics like smallpox devastated populations in the Americas, while floods, famine, and trade demands challenged Ming China. These pressures forced societies to adapt economically, socially, and politically. It highlighted human resilience and innovation. Third, religion and culture were central to unity and power, and they had to undergo many religious changes in these empires. The Catholic Church was guided by Spanish politics. The Aztec religion was structured around social life and justified rulers. Arabia used Islam to unite, and Japan used Shinto beliefs, but this would soon change with the effects of colonization and the merging of some civilizations. Finally, social and racial structures reveal both hierarchy and inequality. The roles of women, indigenous peoples, and enslaved populations show how power was distributed and how societies responded to inequality and integration. In this discussion, I'll analyze how these empires were similar and different in politics, religion, economy, and social/racial organization, and how environmental and disease-related challenges reshaped them. By the end, you'll see that studying these societies isn't just about history, it's about understanding the foundations of our modern world. Let's talk about how exactly I'll do this. First, I'll show the structures of each empire and explain their relevance. Then I'll closely examine their similarities and differences because they have so many. So without further ado, let's go. If anything is an example of changes, we can see it in Japan. These empires reveal that power is never permanent, it shifts, evolves, and reacts to both human ambition and natural forces. As we move from their grandeur to their challenges, we begin to see how each civilization experienced major transformations that reflected the political, religious, economic, and social changes of their time. This is also while facing the devastating impacts of environmental shifts and disease. From the 13th through the 16th centuries, Japan's society evolved from a decentralized feudal system into one inching toward unification, shaped by both internal conflict and outside influences. All of these changes defined Japan's identity. Politically, Japan transitioned from imperial control to the rise of military government. After centuries of imperial rule back to the key term Kofun period, where ancient burial grounds are found, power shifted to the shoguns. The shogunate created Japan's first samurai-based government, but this ended in warfare. It encouraged stronger local governance and castle construction, as seen in Kyoto's development around major temples. Religious life flourished and diversified during this time. A key term, Shinto, Japan's indigenous religion, continued to connect people to nature and their ancestors, and sacred spaces, such as the key term Shinano River, which was often seen as spiritually significant. Sergio Maldonado stated in his Module 8 lecture on ancient Japan that Buddhism, introduced centuries earlier, remained powerful, especially Zen Buddhism, which influenced art, ethics, and samurai discipline. Meanwhile, new spiritual leaders known as Toji, or grand women, began to emerge. Janet Goodwin states in her paper on page 439 in Gender in Early Classical Japan that these women held influence as mediums and spiritual figures who guided communities, blending Shinto practices with local folk traditions. The arrival of Christian missionaries in the 16th centuries introduced yet another belief system, one that fascinated some, but it threatened traditional order, prompting rulers to eventually suppress it. Socially, Japan remained stratified, but subtle shifts began to appear. Janet Goodwin states on page 437 of her paper that gender dynamics were evolving. In early medieval Japan, women could own land, manage estates, and inherit property. Figures like the Toji reflected this tradition of female strength and spiritual presence. However, as Confucian ideals spread from China, women's roles became more confined to domestic duties. Environmental changes and disease also shaped Japan's path. The country's mountainous terrain and rivers, like the Shinano River, created fertile land, but also brought floods and harsh winters that demanded agricultural adaptation. Sergio Maldonado noted on his lecture on early Japan that the key term Weichi described early Japanese societies as organized, independent, and deeply tied to nature. Ultimately, Japan between the 13th and 16th centuries represents a civilization balancing tradition and transformation. Political rivalries led to southern stronger governance. Shinto and Buddhist beliefs shaped identity, and Toji women preserved spiritual leadership. Through war, faith, and resilience, Japan evolved into a society of balance and belief. As we shift from Japan to China, the Ming Dynasty stands out as one of the most powerful and sophisticated empires of the 13th through 16th centuries. Rising after the collapse of the Mongol-led Yuan rule, the Ming restored native Chinese control and re-established order. But like all civilizations, they faced immense changes in religion, politics, disease, their environment, and even racial ones too. Politically, the Ming built one of the most stable and organized systems of government in world history. The Ming emperors sought to strengthen their key term, polity, by restoring Confucian administration and promoting loyalty to the throne. Sergio Maldonado stated on his Module 8 lecture on the Ming Dynasty that the emperor held supreme authority, but layers of bureaucracy ensured order across vast territories. This centralized structure allowed the Ming key term empire to recover from Mongol domination and maintain unity among diverse regions and peoples for nearly 3 centuries. Religion and culture under the Ming reflected both unity and a key term, pluralism. Pluralism is when a state or society has diverse members that maintain traditional culture. Temples, monasteries, and local festivals express deep spiritual traditions, while art and literature reached new heights. Jane Burbank wrote a paper called Empires in World History, specifically talking about the Ming Dynasty on page 205, stating that the Ming court supported monumental architecture such as the rebuilding of the Great Wall and the construction of the Forbidden City in Beijing. These are symbols of both imperial strength and cultural revival. It changed a lot when religion started getting more restrictive as ages went on. Socially, the Ming Empire upheld strict hierarchies but allowed for limited mobility through education and trade. The scholar official class dominated politics and culture. Peasants formed the backbone of the economy. Sergio Maldonado states that the artisans and merchants gained new opportunities as commerce expanded. Confucian views that ranked them in low status soon began to praise the peasants. Women's roles varied by class. Elite women often lived under patriarchal control, while rural women contributed heavily to farming and textile production. Jane Burbank also noted that the environmental conditions and disease also played key roles in shaping the Ming's trajectory. The Yellow River's frequent flooding destroyed crops and displaced communities. Climatic changes during the late Ming, sometimes called the Little Ice Age, led to poor harvests and famine. Additionally, outbreaks of disease weakened the population and strained the government's stability. The arrival of new pathogens and global trade links made the Ming more vulnerable to epidemics that reduced its economic and military strength. It changed the course of the key term dynasty forever. The history of the Ming Dynasty remains highly relevant today because it helps us understand how societies organize power, manage diversity, and respond to crises. Its centralized polity demonstrates the importance of strong governance and administrative systems in maintaining order across vast territories. A lesson that is still reflected in modern governments around the world. The pluralism of Ming religious and cultural life shows how societies can balance tradition. While Japan and China each demonstrate unique responses to political, economic, and cultural challenges, the Americas offer yet another perspective on how civilizations adapted and transformed. The Aztec Empire, centered in key term Tenochtitlan, reveals a society built on military strength, religious devotion, and urban planning. Yet, one vulnerable to environmental pressures and disease. The Aztecs, or key term Mexica, built a thriving civilization with advanced agriculture, trade networks, and religious institutions. Despite their strength, environmental challenges, warfare, and the introduction of disease, it dramatically reshaped their society. It left a legacy that lasted forever. Religion was central to Aztec life and power. The Cambridge University published a book on the body of conquistador, stating rituals, sacrifices, and temples reinforced the authority of the emperor and legitimized the social hierarchy. Festivals and ceremonies tied spiritual beliefs directly to agriculture and the cycles of nature. This ensured cohesion among the Mexica and their subjects. However, when colonization took place, this became a downturn, carving an outline of disgrace to the Aztec rituals. Economically, the Aztecs developed an extensive system of tribute and trade. Agricultural innovations, including chinampas or floating gardens, supported a growing population in Tenochtitlan. Sergio Maldonado states in his Module 11 lecture on Spanish conquest and Aztec influence that markets connected regions across the empire, distributing food, crafts, and luxury goods. However, the economy, and indeed the empire itself, was devastated by the introduction of European diseases. Most notably, key term Cocolizitli, a deadly epidemic that decimated populations and weakened social and political structures. After European conquest brought much disease to the Americas, it became hard for the Aztecs to fight back. Environmental factors also influenced the Aztec Empire's trajectory. The region's lakes and fertile lands supported agriculture, but also required complex water management systems. The body of a conquistador stated that the climate fluctuations and resource pressures occasionally caused food shortages, while disease like Cocolizitli combined with Spanish conquest to accelerate the empire's decline. These forces revealed how human societies must adapt to both natural and introduced challenges to survive. The history of the Aztec Empire remains deeply relevant today because it highlights the impact of governance, culture, disease, and social structure. The Mexica's political organization and urban planning in Tenochtitlan demonstrate advanced leadership and innovation. The consequences of epidemics like Cocolizitli show the vulnerability of even powerful civilizations, and these lessons still echo in modern discussions. Turning from the Americas to Europe, the Spanish Empire provides a clear example of political consolidation, religious influence, economic expansion, and a social transformation between the 13th and 16th centuries. Spain evolved from fragmented kingdoms into a powerful centralized polity, capable of governing vast territories both in Europe and overseas. At the same time, contact with America's environmental challenges and disease reshaped Spanish society and its colonial ventures, including interactions with indigenous peoples such as the key term Taino. Sergio Maldonado stated on his Module 12 lecture on Spanish and the Taino that Spain transitioned from separate kingdoms to a united monarchy under Ferdinand and Isabella. The completion of the Reconquista strengthened royal authority and created the framework for colonial expansion. Administrators conducted regular, key-term censuses to manage populations, collect taxes, and enforce laws, reflecting the empire's growing sophistication. Religion played a central role in unifying and controlling society. Catholicism dominated Spain, reinforced through the Inquisition and missionary work abroad. Conversion of indigenous populations, including the Taino in the Caribbean, was often enforced. We can see changes religiously affecting the overall structure. Social and racial structures were deeply influenced by both domestic and colonial developments. In Spain, the key term Black Death was lasting for centuries, and it was a disease that already altered demographics and labor systems. This had very much brought Spain to its last straw before colonization occurred. The history of the Spanish Empire remains relevant today because it demonstrates how political organization, religion, economic systems, and social hierarchies interact with environment and health crises to shape civilizations. Its treatment of the Taino and its responses to disasters and disease reveal lessons about governance, cultural contact, and adaptation. It continues to resonate with modern societies. While each of these empires, the Ming Dynasty, Spanish Empire, Aztec Empire, and Japan, developed in very different regions and contexts, they shared some striking similarities in how they managed power, culture, and society, while also exhibiting unique differences shaped by geography, environment, and historical circumstances. Politically, all four societies relied on structured governance to maintain order, though the forms of control varied. The Ming Dynasty centralized authority under the emperor and a sophisticated polity, with civil service exams ensuring officials were qualified. Japan, by contrast, was more decentralized during much of the 13th through 16th centuries, with regional shoguns controlling territories under eventual unification. The Aztec Mexica, established on an imperial system, relied on tribute from allied city-states, and combined military dominance with sacrifice in Tenochtitlan. Meanwhile, Spain centralized political power under Ferdinand and Isabella, creating a unified monarchy that could project authority across Europe and overseas colonies. Now, despite these differences, all four empires understood the importance of organization and hierarchy to stabilize themselves. Religion was another area of both similarity and difference. Each empire used religion to unify populations and legitimize political power. In the Ming Dynasty, principles like Confucianism and Buddhism guided governance and social behavior, reflecting religious pluralism. Japan's Shinto traditions and Zen Buddhism influenced ethics, cultural practices, and governance, with spiritual leaders like Toji holding local influence. The Aztecs relied on ritual and sacrifice to maintain politics and cosmic order, tying religion directly to military and economic life. Spain, meanwhile, used Catholicism as a unifying and controlling force, both in Europe and in the colonies, including the conversion of indigenous peoples like the Taino. While all four civilizations connected religion to governance, the specific practices and degree of tolerance for diversity varied. Spain was less pluralistic within Europe, but experienced pluralism in the colonies. The Ming allowed multiple faiths. Japan maintained a blend of Shinto and Buddhism, and the Aztecs were highly ritualistic with limited tolerance. Economically, the empires also shared some parallels but diverged in their methods. The Ming Dynasty emphasized agricultural productivity, trade, networks, and global commerce. Japan's economy was primarily agrarian, with local trade flourishing and foreign trade increasing slightly with the arrival of merchants. The Aztec economy relied heavily on tribute from conquered peoples and sophisticated agricultural systems. Spain's economy was fueled by extraction and trade from its colonies, including precious metals and forced labor of indigenous peoples like the Taino. One similarity is that all four empires depended on resource management and trade to sustain their populations. But the Spanish model relied most heavily on exploitation of overseas colonies, whereas Ming, Japan, and Aztecs had economies more focused on internal production and regional networks. Social and racial structures reveal further comparisons. All four civilizations maintained hierarchies, though the criteria differed. The Ming emphasized bureaucratic merit and class distinctions between scholars, peasants, artisans, and merchants. Japan maintained a strict feudal hierarchy with samurai, peasants, artisans, and merchants, while also undergoing gender shifts, with elite women and toji holding some influence. The Aztecs had structured systems of nobles, commoners, and slaves, later affected by European contact and racial mixing, documented in the Quitrim casta paintings. Spain codified social and racial hierarchies in the colonies, particularly through the distinctions between Europeans, indigenous peoples, Africans, and mixed populations. All four societies controlled populations through hierarchy, but Spain and the Aztecs had a more rigid racial or ethnic components to its social organization. And lastly, environmental challenges and disease also affected these civilizations in comparable ways. But the events were context specific. Japan and the Ming faced floods, earthquakes, and agricultural pressures. This prompted engineering and governance solutions. The Aztecs dealt with environmental constraints in the Valley of Mexico, but were devastated by epidemics such as Coquelicilli. While Spain's colonies saw massive indigenous peoples lost from disease, they still had lingering effects from the Black Death in Europe. Disease reshaped all these empires politically and economically, both the Americas and Europe, and this demonstrated the vulnerability of the most powerful empires in the world. In conclusion, the Ming Dynasty, Japan, the Aztec Empire, and the Spanish Empire, and the Tainos each faced challenges and opportunities that shaped their political, religious, economic, and social structures. While they differed in geography, culture, and historical context, they shared important similarities: centralized or organized governance, religion as a source of authority and cohesion, economic systems adapted to their environments, hierarchical social structures, and responses to environmental pressures and diseases. Differences in pluralism, racial hierarchies, gender roles, and vulnerability to epidemics show that context mattered deeply. It influenced how much the empire managed its people and its resources. Studying the civilizations is not just about understanding the past, it's about recognizing the ongoing influence of their innovations, governance, structure, cultural practices, and social systems. From the bureaucratic polity of the Ming to the urban planning of Tenochtitlan, the centralized power of Spain, and the cultural resilience of Japan, these societies continue to inform modern politics, trade, and religion. Their successes and failures remind us that human societies must adapt to both internal challenges and external pressures. Ultimately, examining these empires helps us understand the complexity of human history and provides valuable lessons for the world we live in today. Thank you, and I hope you learned a lot from this podcast about the relevance and similarities of civilizations in the past.